Imagine finding out you're in violation of a law you didn't know existed. What if I told you that for small business owners across America, that may be the case? It's the Corporate Transparency Act, and it goes into effect this year. So what is the bill? Who has to report? And what are the ramifications if you don't? We're joined today by attorney Elyse Pillitteri, who to talk about those issues and more. That's all coming up right here, right now. I'm Sam Chen, and this is Face the Issues. Good evening and welcome to Face the Issues. I'm Sam Chen. Imagine finding that you're in violation of a law you didn't know existed. That's what may happen to small business owners under Congress's new Corporate Transparency Act. So what is the Corporate Transparency Act? Who is required to file? What are the ramifications? We're joined by attorney Elyse Pillitteri to talk about those issues and more. Elyse, welcome to Face the Issues. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Just by way of bio, you are a shareholder with the firm Fitzpatrick, Lentz & Buba, based here in the Lehigh Valley. You've been working in the business corporate law area. Let's start talking about this bill, the Corporate Transparency Act. This is passed by Congress. What is it? What is its purpose?
So the Corporate Transparency Act, or many refer to it as the CTA, was passed by Congress in 2021. It went into effect on January 1 of 2024 of this year, pursuant to regulations promulgated by FinCEN. That's a division of the Treasury Department that's largely spearheading this law and the implementing regulations. The CTA is going to apply to an estimated 34 million businesses in the United States, and that's just this year. Each year thereafter, there's going to be an additional 5 million subject to the CTA. And what it aims to do is combat things like money laundering, tax fraud, and other illicit activities.
As with most things that go through Congress, it seems like the motivation behind it is good. They saw a problem that there's small businesses or individuals that may be committing business fraud, money laundering, things like that, and they're trying to solve the problem. Mm-hmm. But there is a lot of angst about this among the U.S. Chamber, the National Federation of Independent Business, and other small business organizations. What is the angst and the concern?
Just the sheer number of reports that are going to need to be filed is also, the CTA requires disclosure about the beneficial owners of reporting companies. So that's your individuals that have substantial control or have a 25% ownership interest. The type of information that needs to be reported is personal identifying information. So the individual's home address, their date of birth, a passport photo or another government-issued ID needs to be uploaded to FinCEN. There's concern about getting this information from beneficial owners, and it puts a lot of there's strict compliance requirements that businesses need to follow. There's some penalties that apply to it, and there's strict deadlines. It's a continuing reporting obligation, and many business owners are concerned.
Sure, and just the sheer the sheer volume, I think, of what you have to do.
Yes, and it's not, it is a new law. There is guidance, but it's not clear cut at this point in time. There's a lot of questions, and individuals that control businesses have those questions and often need to consult with counsel in order to figure them out. And even we as counsel still have questions about the law.
Fairly typical for something that comes out of Congress, having worked there myself. One of the misconceptions that I've been hearing is that some small business owners think the CTA, like a lot of things Congress passes, apply to these large corporations. But in fact, if I understand correctly, this does not apply to the large corporations. It is specifically for smaller businesses. Well,
so the CTA applies to any reporting company unless you're exempt. A reporting company are corporations, LLCs, limited partnerships, any entity that was formed via the filing with the Secretary of State or similar agency. It also captures some foreign entities that are registered to do business here. However, there are 23 exemptions. Those are largely targeted at organizations that are are otherwise regulated by the government already.
Okay.
So that is the reason for some of these exemptions. Maybe the government already has that information. So things like banks are exempt, credit unions, nonprofits that have qualified for the 501c3 exemption.
Sure.
Again, these are entities that are already subject to more regulation. And if you're a small or medium-sized business, if you don't otherwise meet those 23 exemptions, you are required to file a report.
Okay. Yeah, and that makes sense given, to your point, how much more nonprofits or financial institutions have to file as it is already.
Exactly.
According to the CTA, you would need to report if, one, there's substantial control over the company, or two, you own or control at least 25% of the company's interests. The 25% I feel like is rather black and white. You can look at the numbers and determine who controls 25%. This first part of it, substantial control over the company, how are they defining what substantial control over the company means?
Okay, so there's three pieces to that. The first is that this is a company obligation, so it's the company's obligation to file a beneficial owner report with FinCEN and then obtain that information about their information to report it to FinCEN. As far as the substantial control, it asks a variety of questions. Again, it's one of those vague things that business owners in conjunction with counsel need to determine. Individuals that meet that criteria would include your senior officers, CEOs, COOs, CFOs. It would include individuals that have the authority to appoint senior officers or a majority of board members. But then there's your vague category of really anybody that has substantial control or has control over substantial decisions is considered a beneficial owner, and that person's information needs to be reported in the BOI report. And substantial decisions means just think of the big major business decisions.
Sure.
Getting a large loan, making a significant expenditure, adopting a budget. All of those things are significant decisions, and if you have authority to make them, you're considered a beneficial owner. But then I do want to cover that last piece, which mentioned, you indicated that the owning 25% is clear cut and black and white, and that's actually not the case. Some entities have complicated cap structures. In the case, when you are determining who owns 25% equity interest, you need to say an entity has some options out there. You need to assume all of those options are exercised when factoring who has 25% control. And then it's important that the CTA traces ownership down to the individual level and think about all the entities that are owned by another entity.
Right.
So then you need to figure out who are the beneficial owners of that entity. So, and trace it down the chain and see if individuals, by virtue of their equity interest in the indirect entity, has 25% ownership interest. So it can get complicated.
So it's a lot more complicated than it seems on paper, at least.
Other than single-member LLCs, single corporations owned by a single person, it can get very complicated, and we do recommend that to the extent you're an entity with a complicated capital structure or equity holders who include other entities, that's when you want to consult with counsel or an accountant.
And who needs to do the filing? You mentioned earlier the business needs to file this. Is it the business? Do individuals also within the business have filing responsibilities?
Ultimately, the filing responsibility is on the entity itself.
Okay.
So who makes that filing is up to the entity.
Sure.
That would be the case, yep.
Okay. So in the second segment, we're going to talk about just what small businesses should be doing. You've written a few fantastic pieces about this, including kind of a checklist of everything small businesses need to do. If you're a small business owner right now and you're unsure if you fall into this, if you have to report this or not, how do they find out if they're part of this reporting requirement?
Well, I have said that before, consult with legal counsel. But if other business owners do not want to do that or don't have the resources to do that, FinCEN has issued some great guidance. There's a small entity compliance guide on FinCEN's website that actually includes some great checklists as to questions you need to ask yourself to figure out the answers to some of these questions. So I would definitely go there if you don't have legal counsel at your fingertips.
And you mentioned earlier, this is the first year that the filings are going to happen, and it's probably going to grow every year. What is the deadline this year for these businesses to get this filed?
Another one where there's not a black and white answer, but for entities that were formed prior to this year, you have until the end of the year to submit your report. Entities that are formed within this year of 2024, you have 90 days from the formation filing to submit your report.
Got it.
And then entities that will be formed in 2025 and thereafter, then you only have 30 days to get your report in. So there are strict deadlines that you need to comply with, and it's important that businesses ahead of the end of the year to start gathering this information so you can meet that December 31 deadline, because that is the deadline that's going to apply to most businesses as the law stands now.
Very good. Elyse, thank you for helping us understand that. We're going to go to the break. When we come back, I want to talk about what businesses should be doing as they get ready to make these filings.
Great, thanks.
Don't go away. We'll be right back.
Face the Issues is produced and recorded in the studios of Lighthouse TV. Positively different. Watch Lighthouse TV wherever you go. Available on Roku, Amazon Fire TV, and Apple TV. You can view our in-house studio productions on demand, or watch what's on the station right now with our 24/7 live stream. Search Lighthouse TV online on your streaming device, or go to our website for more information. Visit lighthousetv.org to stay connected. There you can find out what's currently on the air and coming up, how to watch in your area on cable, satellite, broadcast, or streaming devices. Watch past programs or our live stream. Follow us on social media and learn more about the station, our hosts, and our programming. Lighthouse TV, positively different.
Welcome back to Face the Issues. Elyse, thanks again for being here, for joining us. I want to move this conversation from what the CTA is to how small businesses can figure this all out. You had said earlier there's a lot of confusion with it, even attorneys being the first year that everyone was doing this. There's a lot of just things that are kind of gray. They're not quite clear cut and black and white. Let's just say for small business owners, you're watching this for the first time and they go, okay, there's this regulation. I've got to figure out if I need to file. They figure out if they need to file, and now they know they have to file. Where do they start the process? What would you recommend they do first to get this ball rolling?
It depends how, if it's a single business owner, they're going to know what information to report. Business owners that have various different equity holders, I would say start by gathering your organizational documents and otherwise getting organized. Some business owners have different subsidiaries, or they own or control multiple entities. So gathering all of those governing documents will help dictate how many reports need to be filed, and it will also identify some of those individuals that own 25% in the equity in the business. And then I would, if you're not consulting with legal counsel, I would go to FinCEN's small entity compliance guideline. That lays out a lot of questions that will help determine who those individuals are that have substantial influence and need to be reported.
I'm assuming, and I know your firm works on issues like this. Have you been doing some of these filings this year? And if so, how complicated has it been?
It ranges on it depends on the client, and like I said, how many equity holders they have, and whether they're owned by any other entities. So it can get very complicated. We don't actually submit the filing ourselves, though we do provide guidance as to how it is submitted.
And you mentioned earlier that the entity is the one that's doing the filing, but they do need to collect information from different individuals.
Right.
Obviously, advice to start early if you don't know, especially which individuals you need information from.
Exactly. So after you identify who those beneficial owners are, that's when you need to start reaching out to them and gathering their personal information. Like I said before, the FinCEN's even requiring that you submit a copy of a government-issued ID. Some investors are not going to want to provide that information. Sure. So it's important that you start early and also communicate these requirements to investors so that they know that if we don't comply, you face significant penalties, and that ultimately harms the investor. Another thing to do is you can recommend that your beneficial owners get FinCEN IDs. That's just something that you apply for online, and then if you get one of those, rather than submitting the personal identifying information of your beneficial owner, you just have to provide their FinCEN ID. And one thing that I haven't touched on yet is that this is a continuing obligation. So anytime beneficial ownership information changes, or even the CEO's address changes, companies only have 30 days to update its report, or otherwise potentially face penalties. So it's just another benefit of obtaining the FinCEN ID is then that way the onus is on the individual to update the personal information rather than the company.
Sure. That was one of the other questions. This is something that is continual. It's not a one and done. You mentioned that if there's something that changes, so the CEO moves the new address, then they need to update that information. If nothing changes, is this still an annual file?
No.
Okay.
If nothing changes, then you submit one report and you are done. However, that's not the case for most entities. Sure. Think about if there's a change in control, you sell via a merger and the ownership changes, then you need to submit a report within 30 days. Somebody dies and their equity interest is transferred to someone else, or the CEO dies and you have to replace that person, then that information needs to be reported within 30 days.
And complicated too, if when we're talking about entities that are owned by entities and you're trying to figure out who owns what portion, do they have to keep updating that
Correct.
The moment that something there changes?
Correct. And then on that point, because this can get complicated, and I mentioned before, some investors are going to resist providing this information, and you want to get, one thing that you can do is proactively amend the governing documents of your entity to put the onus on any investor or member of an LLC to provide that information to the company. And the failure to do so, you have to indemnify the company. So that's something that we are recommending and putting in our form operating agreements now. It's good for all entities to do that.
You've mentioned this a few times, at least, the idea that if a company is not in compliance, there are penalties. Has the government stated what those penalties would be? They have.
It is important to say that as the law is written as willful failures. So it is, I don't want to actually speak to what the FinCEN will or will not do, but willfully filing incorrect or fraudulent information carries civil penalties of up to, I believe it's $500 a day. So these can get quite steep, and even criminal penalties, imprisonment up to 2 years, and fines of $10,000 in connection with those criminal penalties.
I imagine the government is going to see that similar to what they see as like falsifying business records. If it's willful, that it's something in that similar vein of you provide the government with false information about your business.
Correct.
And thus the penalties seem to be in that similar vein of something like business fraud or falsifying business records or something like that.
Correct. It will be interesting to see how this plays out. Right now, I don't know of any entity that's been subject to penalties just because it's so soon, but the law as written has some strict penalties, and it's important that entities get ahead of this.
Yeah, so this is a big deal, and again, I think a lot of small businesses aren't aware of this yet. Certainly, the large organizations have been trying to make their members aware, but I think a lot of small businesses aren't necessarily aware that this is in place yet. One of the things you've written in a piece that you have, a checklist that you have for small business owners, is that you highly recommend businesses establish a pattern for collecting that information and then having a single point of contact for filing. Can you explain why you think that is that important? Well,
larger entities often have a compliance department. That's not going to be the case for smaller business owners. I think it's a great idea to have one person manage this. Otherwise, it can be difficult to stay organized. To keep a record of all of the beneficial owner information is going to be an important task that should be specifically designated to a single person, ideally.
Yeah. Other advice you would give? I mean, I know you have this long checklist on your website, but what other advice would you give to a small business owner who might be watching this and thinking, oh shoot, I'm behind the 8 ball. I don't know where to go. Obviously, to your website, to any other, a lot of different firms and accountants are dealing with this issue. But what other advice would you give to a small business owner starting this process? Well,
I would say it is still early. So don't get overwhelmed now. This sounds really complicated. In many cases it is, but just to get started now and to start asking questions and start gathering information. Ultimately, after submitting the report, I would say there needs to be some security procedures within your small business. Sure. Because you're storing personal identifying information, and as we all know, threats of hacks are pressing on all business owners. So to put all records in a secure place, save them in a secure place, and to keep a record of all the reports that you file so that you know when it's time to update them.
Yeah, and hacking-wise, this is a big one because you're talking about just essentially the people that call the shots at the company. It's their information that's going to be stored on the server somewhere or in a cloud somewhere. And so as far as the security perspective, it's not just random people's information, it's all the people that kind of call the shots in the company in one place. The
information that the hackers will want when trying to infiltrate a company. So that's another reason our firm recommends obtaining the FinCEN IDs if possible, because there's less security risk associated with that.
That makes a lot of sense. Last question. This has been challenged in court. I expect it to be challenged further in court. There are some people that a district court ruled it unconstitutional, but that was a very narrow decision that's also being appealed. So businesses, that's not something that's universal right now. Businesses still have to do this even though a court ruled against the law.
Yes, at our firm we're keeping track of all the CTA-related litigation, but that ruling, as you mentioned, it was an Alabama federal court, but they specifically narrowed the decision to only apply to the plaintiffs in that case. After the decision came out, FinCEN went so far as to issue a statement on its website that said, look, we're aware of this, but we're still enforcing it against everybody else. So the default is to get those reports in unless you qualify for that narrow exception noted in the case.
Understood. Elyse, thank you again for your help. I know a lot of the small business owners who will watch this and appreciate the insight that you've given.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, our pleasure. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
Watch Lighthouse TV wherever you go. Available on Roku, Amazon Fire TV, and Apple TV. You can view our in-house studio productions on demand, or watch what's on the station right now with our 24/7 live stream. Search Lighthouse TV online on your streaming device, or go to our website lighthousetv.org for more information. Lighthouse TV, positively different. Face the Issues is produced and recorded in the studios of Lighthouse TV. Positively different.
Welcome back to Face the Issues. Elyse, thank you so much for joining us today, for your insights into this. Here, we like to, kind of in our last segment, closing out, get to know our guests, humanize our guests beyond the issues that you work on. Obviously, you're not your job. But one of the questions I love to ask, especially the first time someone's on our show, is your why. You're an attorney. You've had an impressive record. You've clerked. You went to George Washington University Law School, incredible law school. Like I said, you've clerked, and now you're working in corporate and business law. What made you decide to become an attorney?
I think it was ingrained in me at a young age. I remember I was in the 2nd grade, and my teacher, Mrs. Richardson at St. Thomas More, asked us to dress up our bear in what profession, and I was the lawyer bear in 2nd grade. So I wanted to be a lawyer for a long time, and then it solidified when I was a finance major at University of Maryland, took some business law-oriented courses, and liked the logic of it, the negotiation aspects of being a lawyer, and then I found my way to GW Law.
Yeah. For any young person watching this that has dreams of being a lawyer, any advice for what they should do?
I would say take an internship, whether it be paid or unpaid, to try and get a feel for what a law office is like, or what other, there's many different types of jobs you can get as a lawyer, but to take internships early on to see if it's the right fit for you.
Yeah. One of the things I like about you is that, yes, you're an attorney, you're very good at your job, but you also have a life that you like to live, and you're not sold out to your work. You do a lot of traveling. Can you tell us a little bit, where's your favorite place that you've been, and where else do you want to go?
So I'm a huge fan of Costa Rica. I've been there 6 times now. I go to this little town called Santa Teresa, and they have dirt roads, and you ride around on ATVs. It's my favorite place in the world. And this fall, I'm thinking of going to Asia, specifically Thailand, because I've never been, and they say it's a good country to go to first if you haven't. So
You've
really
never been to Thailand, never been to Asia?
Asia,
oh, wow.
Asia, period. So I'm looking forward to that.
And what made you get into travel? Travel is one of those things where you meet people and they either do it a lot or they don't do it at all. Very, very few people are like, I travel every now and then. What made you get into travel?
I'm not even sure. Probably just my first trip abroad. I was lucky my parents wanted to culture us as kids, and so I took some trips as a young kid, and then at University of Maryland, I got the opportunity to study abroad, and I lived in Italy for several months of the year, and got to go all around Europe, and just greatly appreciated that opportunity.
What would you say to Americans? I mean, Americans are notoriously, at least the stereotype is that we're notoriously ignorant of what happens around the rest of the world. Mm-hmm. What would you say to Americans about the benefits of leaving these borders and getting to see the rest of the world?
Well, it's just that, is getting to experience different cultures and different people, different foods. It can be an really enriching aspect of your life, so from a personal level, but then also I think makes you a better person in general too.
I think it's great advice. Elyse, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
That is our show this evening. My thanks to attorney Elyse Pillitteri for joining us, for breaking down this complicated law that is going to affect millions of Americans throughout our country. Of course, my thanks to each of you for tuning in, and we hope to see you again right back here next week. Until then, my name is Sam Chen. On behalf of all of us here at Face the Issues, thank you and good night.